Oh, joyous day! Christmas is around the corner, and Santa has left me an early Christmas present. Let's see what I got this year. Oh. Uh. Okay, what the fuck? Greetings from the Tech Cave. Fenris here, and today we are taking a look at what remains of a Super Nintendo. Now, this system was recently purchased off eBay, and I got it for a whole $1.30. And based off the condition of the system, you can see exactly why. This thing is barely held together, and it kind of just looks like a zombified console at this point. So, according to the description, the seller bought it over a decade ago, managed to get it working to some extent, and it died again sometime last year. Now, the board is said to have several bad traces, and it's suspected that one or more of the major ICs have failed. Now, had it not sold, it was going to get thrown in the trash, and I was not going to let that happen. So, I decided to pick the system up and attempt to perform a SNESMAS miracle to it, if you will. Now, I'm going to completely rebuild this system from the ground up thanks to some new parts that were recently made public. So, without further delay, let's tear the system down. Okay, so we got the system torn apart, and as you can see, they weren't kidding about the level of damage this board had sustained. Now, the board has a ton of wires just kind of all over the place, and the shell is held together with tape and pieces of shipping boxes. This is quite the definition of the term hack job, but I can take a guess as to say the previous owner just wanted a project system to work on, and they weren't too familiar with solder work. Which, hey, you gotta learn somehow, right? Now, in terms of salvaging this board, it might be too far gone to do. Instead, we will be harvesting its chipsets as well as a few other major components and installing it into one of these. This is an open SFC board by Starlight Retro, and it is a full reproduction board of the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom. The purpose of this board is to replace any old and decaying boards with something new and fresh, and given we have Frankenstein's childhood console in our hands, it's perfect for this application. So, we will start with harvesting as many good parts as we can off this board and shell, and go from there basically. So, let's get to it. Alright, now that we have harvested all the good stuff from the hacked up console, we can begin installing the harvested circuit components onto the main OpenSFC board. Now you may have noticed this is pre-assembled, and that's because I did not want to dedicate a large portion of this video on building the board from the ground up. Trust me, it is a very long process and it requires absolute concentration. But if you want an assembly video on this board, I recommend checking out this video here by Long Island Retro Gaming, to which I have to give a major shout out to them for not only selling me the board, but also the components needed to build it. It was really cool for him to do that, so please check out his channel as well as his shop, both of which are linked down below. And no, this is not a sponsorship, they're just really cool. So with that out of the way, let's get to installing some circuit components. So we will begin with the through-hole stuff first, because those don't really need any prep work in order to install them onto the main board. The surface mount components will actually need some extra prep before we put them on, so let's get to installing. Alright, let's talk about prepping some surface mount parts, and we'll start with this common node choke. So the way I prep the harvested surface mount parts is I first start by applying some flux to the actual solder legs, and then I hit it with some wick. And the reason why I do this is because we need to make sure that these pads are as flat as possible. Otherwise, when mounting them onto our replacement board, you might notice that it gets all crooked, or it may not align correctly. Alright. So we got the pads nice and flat. So now, we're just going to take this component and solder it in place. Now, in hindsight, In hindsight, I probably should have waited to install the RF modulator before installing the common node choke, but you know, it's still completely doable. So it is what it is. Let's just solder it on. Alright, so with the common node choke installed, we can now move forward with the rest of the surface mount components. Now, I'm not going to show the process of me prepping each surface mount component prior to installing it to the board, mainly because it's the same principle as the common node choke here. Put some flux on the pins and run some desolder braid through it, so yeah. I will, however, show me installing each component to their designated areas, so yeah. Without further delay, let's get to it. Alright, now that we got all the necessary components installed on the main board, we can now move forward with testing the system to see if it works. Now, I know the description said the chips died on this system, but we can at least verify that now without having to utilize the hacked up system board. So let me just grab the sound module and get this thing all hooked up as well. Actually, wait a minute, I need to install the power jack first before I can actually test it. So let's go ahead and do that. Can't forget the voltage regulator either. Kinda need that to be able to power the system. Okay, so we have the Super Nintendo all hooked up. I got a RGB SCART cable hooked up, power cable, the original sound module, and I got my burn-in test cart plugged in. And just temporarily, I'm using a Super Famicom controller port. It's going to be the same functionally speaking, so let's hit the power. And as you can see, we are booting up to the burn-in test screen, so that's good. Let's scroll down to burn-in test. So we are booting into the burn-in test, which is good. And it looks like we have an APU BB fail. I don't think I've seen this error before. So let's try replacing the sound module. So let me just grab a known working sound module. Got this guy right here. Let's make sure that it's not just the sound module. All right, we're booting into the game. Or sorry, we're going through the burn-in test. And again, we got BB fail, and I know this sound module does work, so it looks like there's something else wrong with the internal hardware. So let's just flick that off. I'm gonna have to check around a bit to see what's going on with this board. So yeah, let me do a couple of things and see where we're at. Okay, so what I decided to do is swap out the original CPU with a replacement CPU that I've had in my parts bin. Now, granted, yes, they're both AREV CPUs, but this is just the only spare that I have on me currently, and I at least do know that this one works, so, you know, take it for what you will. So we're gonna hit the power. So we're back onto the burn-in test screen. So let's run burn-in test, and I'm using the original sound module, by the way. So let's see where we go. Passing. And look at that, APU passed. It just goes to show you, AREV CPUs really suck. Okay, so it passed the burn-in test. So we're gonna flick off the power. Gonna take out the cartridge. And we're just gonna go ahead and plug in our SD to SNES. And we are booting into the SD to SNES, which is good. Like I mentioned before, if the SD to SNES does not boot up, then that's a clear indicator that there's something wrong with your CPU. But as you can see, we're able to boot into it. So actually, where did I put that remote? There it is. Let's just back out of there. So we're just going to boot up Tournament Fighters, because I want to see if we're able to get through 2 matches. What the hell? Yeah, that doesn't look good. So it looks like we might have some other problems. But let's see if we can at least get through a match. Kind of hard to do this one-handed. It looks like the logic is working, but the background detail is all jacked up. Which, if I remember correctly, background is usually caused by PPU1. Which is interesting that it didn't flag, but it just kind of shows you that, you know, the burn-in test cart isn't always going to flag potential errors. Alright, enough of that. So but you know what? Let's just plug in Donkey Kong Country just to make sure that it's not just the SD to SNES. I mean, so far so good, right? Okay, so far it seems to be just fine with... Actually, let me just see if I can grab that. There we go. But yeah, it seems to be working just fine with Donkey Kong Country, so... I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. So let me try the SD to SNES again. We're gonna boot back into Tournament Fighters. Come on. I'm hitting the wrong button. There we go. What we're looking for is seeing if we can replicate the issue that we just saw. Yeah, we're able to replicate it with Tournament Fighter. Let me hit reset to see if... Let me do long reset. Longer reset. Yeah, it's not affecting the SD to SNES menu. Does it affect other games? Theoretically, it should. Yeah, it's not doing anything with Mario World. No, I'm playing with one hand, so... Yeah, it's not doing it with Mario World. It's just specifically Tournament Fighter. So I'm gonna look into that some more, because that's interesting. So I'll be back in a moment. Alright, so I decided to go ahead and replace the PPU1 with a known working PPU1. And the reason why I went with PPU1 is because the way that the Super Nintendo draws graphics, the PPU1 does all the graphics data, while the PPU2 is all the color data. So anytime that you have like glitchy graphics and things like that, and it's not a RAM related issue, it's typically the PPU1. Although sometimes it can be the CPU, but if it's the CPU, it would do more than just glitch the graphics. The game logic would go all over the place. So with that out of the way, we're just gonna go ahead and hit the power. And as you can see, we are still booting into the the SD to SNES menu. But let's see if Ninja Turtles is good to go. Okay, so far so good. Let's see if we can end a round without the background glitching up. Really hard to play a fighting game with one hand. But as we can see, the backgrounds are now stable. So, confirmed, it was a PPU1 related issue. So, now that we've gotten the hardware working again, we can now move on to the next step. Actually, hang on. Before we move on to the next step, there is one other thing I need to check. And that is, we need to see if other video formats work. So, let's do composite first. We are getting an image over composite. And finally, S video. We are getting an image over S video. So, for all intents and purposes, this hardware fully works. So, now that we've got the system working, we can now move on to the next step.
So now that we have a working main system board, we can move on to transferring all the necessary components from the stock sound module board over to the new board. But before we do that, we got to do one extra thing. We got to sever the link between pins 9 and 10 of the DAC chip landing for the sound balance fix. Yes, when Starlight made these boards, they made them to be as faithful with the originals as possible, flaws and all sadly, which, given the open source nature of this project, I would love to see someone update them with the necessary fixes already applied. That way, I don't have to bodge another 47 microfarad capacitor into place when it should have just been there to begin with. As well, we will not be installing the ceramic resonator, and instead installing the crystal oscillator and two 20 picofarad caps for the speed fix. So, without further delay, let's get to it. Well, this is a neat little surprise. In addition to recapping the board, they also went ahead and changed out the resonator for a crystal oscillator, and it's the correct frequency too, 24.576 megahertz. So, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and take this crystal as well as all of the surrounding chips. So, let's get to it. Okay, so we have this mostly reassembled to this point, and unfortunately I seem to have misplaced the 24.576 megahertz crystal that I harvested from the original SHVC sound module, sorry. But fortunately I do have some spares on hand, so I'm just going to take one of the spares I have, plop it in, solder it on, and we can move on with testing. Alright, so we have the system all hooked up again. I have the sound module plugged in, and this time we're using the stock controller ports. And before we continue, you may notice right off the bat, PPU 1 here has been replaced again. And that's because when I went to fire this thing up off camera, it turned out the replacement PPU 1 that I installed died as well. So I had to replace it again with another PPU 1. So hopefully this one is good. So yeah, it's quite unfortunate, but it's also just kind of the reality. Even with replacement parts, you're not guaranteed a solid replacement part that's going to last forever. These chips can just die at any moment. But this one in particular, I got from an APU revision Super Nintendo, so hopefully this will last longer. But with that out of the way, let's hit power, and as we can see, we are booting into the menu. So let's run the burn-in test and hope we get a passing APU and no DMA fail. So let's just run the test. Alright, so it's passing. So we're good on the PPU side, and our APU is also good. So it sounds like everything's good to go. Alright, enough of that. So we've confirmed that the hardware is good to go. The sound module is good to go. So all that's really left to do is replace the original board on the controller port. And luckily, we do have that on hand. Now, was it really necessary to replace the boards on both the sound module and the controller port? Maybe not, but you know, just for consistency's sake, we might as well, right? Now, when installing the LED components, we're not going to install the 160 ohm resistor that was included in my kit. Instead, we're going to install a 100 ohm resistor as well as a slow fade RGB LED, just to kind of make the presentation all that nicer. So let's go ahead, desolder the controller port and the controller cable connector off of the original board and get it soldered onto this.
Alright, so with the controller board all fully assembled, we only got a couple things to take care of. We need to reassemble the sound module since, well, as cool as it is to have this loose, it kind of needs the shielding. But in addition, we need to apply one more fix, and that is the VCC rail fix. Yes, even the main PCB is not spared from the dirty power rails that plague the official boards. So let's go ahead and reassemble this sound module and install these 100 microfarad caps on C90 to C95. And with that, we are now ready to install everything into a new shell. Now, in terms of what shell we will be using, I picked up this nice, clear Retro Game Restore shell from Castlemania Games, and we will be installing our brand new SNES board into it to finish up the look of our new masterpiece. But given we are missing some pieces on this SNES, I did have to dig around my parts bin as well as asked Long Island Retro Gaming to send me an eject lever spring for the eject button. So, let's get to it. And with that, our SNESMAS miracle has been achieved. We took a system that was designated for the trash pile and had given it a brand new lease in life with a whole new shell and board. Now, with all that, along with all the other fixes I had done to it, this system is ready to go for more years of gaming. Now, once again, major props to Long Island Retro Gaming for helping me out by providing me all the parts for this board, as well as the eject mechanism spring. And also, thank you for watching. I hope you all have a very happy holidays and enjoy your time with the loved ones in your life. Now, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, until the blue moon rises, I'll see you next time.